When the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth?
Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief.
May our testimonies be as deep and as strong as that of Jacob, who, when confronted by one who sought to destroy his faith, declared, I could not be shaken.
Hello my friends, Jared Halverson here. Welcome back to Unshaken. Today we're going to be covering the book of Ruth and the first 7 chapters of Samuel. Some amazing material, especially after last week's dizzying spin through the pride cycle in the book of Judges. I'm hoping that today is just what the doctor ordered to help you recalibrate and get your bearings once again. I've read that when figure skaters, for example, are spinning so fast, how do they not get dizzy and just fall down right afterwards? And it's that they try to keep their eyes fixed on a stationary point. And yes, as they're spinning, their heads have to spin around, but they'll hold that gaze as long as they can and then flip their head around and get back on it as quickly as possible. And to me, through the dizziness of the pride cycle in the book of Judges, a really good fixed point to concentrate on is the book of Ruth, because the book of Ruth grows out of the same time period that we studied last week. So despite the fact we saw so many falls into pride and wickedness and destruction, here today we see a story of 2 women, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, who are worth concentrating on. And whenever you get pulled down towards pride, look to the selflessness of Ruth and Naomi. And I think selflessness, like humility, like meekness, like so many other divine attributes, are a wonderful cure for the kinds of problems that bring us down the pride cycle like we saw last week. You get this hint in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, right at the beginning. It says that it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. So that sets the context for what we'll be studying today. The same time period. And if you remember what the verse that came up several times, we see it clearly right at the end of Judges 21. In those days there was no king in Israel. Remember, we saw that 4 times, I think, last week. And then what describes the time period perfectly, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And so there's the moral relativism that, hey, if it sounds good, looks good, feels good to me, then there should be no one standing in my way. And with no king in Israel, there was no one standing in their way. But I do wonder about, so often in Scripture when it speaks of mankind, or here, every man, that's just unfortunate gendered language, but it describes everyone. In this case, though, I wonder if we really can focus it just on the exact word man. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes, because today's focus on women, Ruth and Naomi, will help us see that those 2, at least, did not do what was right just in their own eyes. Actually, maybe I should take that back. It was right in their own eyes, but not only in their own eyes. It was right in the eyes of God. It was His commandments. It was His law of love, His desire to help us overcome our natural man or woman. And I think by internalizing His will and making it their own, by internalizing what was right in God's eyes, until it became right in their own, that's not moral relativism. That is understanding absolute truth as revealed by God Himself, the way, the truth, and the life. And we will see a way and the truth and the ultimate kind of selfless life in the stories of Ruth and Naomi today. They shine brilliantly, especially against that dark background of everything we studied last week. So let's dive in. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, again, setting the stage. It came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, you couldn't have a better setup for this story than this one. A famine in the land, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Amos is going to use this metaphor, a famine for hearing the word of God. And the people would be running to and fro, north to east, looking for the word of God and unable to find it. Well, you see a similar metaphor here. A literal famine in their case, but also a spiritual one. Even to the point that this man of Bethlehem, Judah, now Bethlehem, we think of Jesus' birth, obviously, but the word itself, Beit means house, and Lechem means bread. So Bethlehem means house of bread. What better place for the bread of life himself to be born? But to think of this man who lives in the house of bread, if there's ever a place that should be immune to famine, it should be Bethlehem. And yet there he finds no bread and so has to leave to find it elsewhere. And where does he go? He goes to the country of Moab. Now the Moabites we've seen throughout the wilderness wanderings and the journeys through the wilderness toward the promised land. Moab comes from the children of Lot. If you remember that strange story at the end of Genesis 19. And so there is some common heritage, some common ancestry, but for the most part, there's been some friction between the Moabites and the Israelites. But, oh well, there's nothing in my own territory to hold on to. There's no food here, and my only hope is to go elsewhere. I do worry sometimes when we think of, well, I work so often with people who are struggling in their faith, and often when they tell me their stories, I can't blame them at all for leaving, because what they faced among church members, not church doctrine per se, I've often asked when they describe their problems and their challenges and what they've gone through, if they consider this a top-down problem or a bottom-up problem. Top-down means this is just the way it's supposed to be and you got to deal with it. That's seldom the case. More often it's a bottom-up problem, that this is just church members not living quite, well, not all Israel is of Israel, as Paul said. Not all Latter-day Saints, well, maybe we use this old term, not all Mormons are true Latter-day Saints. And I worry sometimes if people are right here within the house of Israel, in what is supposed to be considered the house of bread, and yet finding no food for themselves. And what are they supposed to do? So often they do end up looking elsewhere and outside, even back to Moab, that hasn't had the fullness in a long, long time. But if there's bread there, if there's something sustainable, then I'm going to go anywhere I can to find it. We, guardians of the storehouse, we who live here in Bethlehem, in the house of the bread of life, we have to do better at making sure people can find sustenance here. Otherwise they will go to Moab or somewhere else. Verse 2, the name of the man, this man who left, was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi, and the name of his two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. Now here we see the beginning of our cast of characters. And as was so often the case in the Old Testament, names mean things. We don't know if they were named this before. In many cases, I doubt it. But, or if after the fact names were changed or names assigned to these figures to help later people remember them, okay? Because the names really are symbolic. For example, Elimelech, Eli, El is God, Elohim, right? Eli, E is the suffix for my or mine. So Eli means my God. Melech means king. So Elimelech means my God is king. Remember last week we met Abimelech, the son of Gideon, who didn't want to be king himself and didn't want his sons to be, but Abimelech, Abi, my father, is king. And sadly, it wasn't his heavenly father that he was referring to. He wanted to be the son of a king and a king himself, and so thus the name. I love that juxtaposition. Last week we get an Abimelech. This week we get an Elimelech. So much better to put the crown on the brow of him who deserves it, God. Well, Naomi, her name means my delight or pleasant. We'll see Naomi herself use a play on words with her own name shortly. And then definitely got to be a play on names or a name assigned after the fact, because no good mother would name her children this. Mahlon means sickness, and Chilion means pining away or weakening. And yes, I doubt I would I would want to name my children anything along those lines. But in terms of the part they play in this account, those titles are incredibly accurate. You see this in the next verse. Verse 3, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them. And the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. So again, no wonder that they are titled Sickness and Weakening, because they did weaken and sicken and die, leaving Naomi, this pleasant, delightful person, in bitterness and completely alone. Well, not completely. You met here 2 other characters, Orpah and Ruth. Orpah is actually where Oprah gets her name. Just switch the R and the P. Orpah means gazelle or mane, because it comes from the root word meaning the back of the neck. Now that also might be a name title assigned to her, since she does end up turning away from Naomi. I can't blame her for this. She's not a wicked character by any stretch of the imagination, but she does turn away from Naomi, so Naomi does see the back of her neck. Ruth, meanwhile, means friend. And amidst all the enemies of Israel all around them, we saw it last week with the Amalekites and the Canaanites and the Midianites, and especially the Philistines. So many enemies on all sides. Some would have considered Moabites enemies as well. But Ruth, this Moabitess, was a true friend. And we'll see that evidenced going forward. Verse 6, Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. I love how that's described there. I think if we saw every blessing from God as a visit from the Lord, see how he said that? The Lord visited his people in giving them bread. I think if we saw it that way, we'd have a much easier time recognizing the Lord's hand in our lives. But notice the order of events from Naomi's perspective. There is bread once again in the house of bread. The famine in Israel has ended. But first, Naomi heard of those blessings from God. Second, she arose out of her present circumstances. And third, she went in search of the blessings she had heard about. I think that's a great approach to follow. Where have you heard of God's blessings? Have you heard of the peace and reassurance and power that can come in the temple? Have you heard of the power of God that flows into your life the moment you begin serious study of Scripture? Have you heard of the power of service to draw us out of ourselves and our difficulties? Have you heard of God's hand in the lives of others? And if so, will you arise from whatever self-perception, whatever difficulties you're in, whatever sense of self or sense of the world, will you arise out of that and go in search of the blessings? You've heard of them. You know where they are. So go seek them. It's exactly what Naomi does. And she brings Orpah and Ruth with her. This is a good time to... The pride cycle is in some ways ending. They were never in it to begin with, it seems. But famine in the land may be one of the evidences of God's destruction, to wake them up and turn them back towards him. Well, in a geographic way, this does turn them back, and it's time to go home. Well, them, her. It turns Naomi back. Israel is her home. It's not the home of Orpah or Ruth. They had been home this whole time in a place that seemed to weather the storm, or lack of storms, lack of rain, just fine. So in these next few verses, pay attention to how Ruth and Orpah react to Naomi and how Naomi reacts to Ruth and Orpah. You see a great example of hot potato with blessings. In Judges, it was tug of war. I want things for myself. No, I want things for myself. Here, it's hot potato. No, you take it. No, you take it. And instead of putting ourselves first, doing what is right in our own eyes, Judges, this is doing what's right by another person. And instead of selfishness of Judges, it's the selflessness of the book of Ruth. It's beautiful. So, verse 8, the plot begins to thicken. Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. Now, no mention of fathers there, even on Orpah and Ruth's part. Return to your mother's house. Are there just widows everywhere the eye can see? Well, considering all the war that we saw through Joshua and Judges, that's a possibility. Either way, return to your families by birth rather than staying here in this family by marriage. Because the only biological connection we had, you were connected to my sons, and I'm obviously connected to them. And so we were just in-laws. Well, if you have in-laws as good as mine are, then it's not a just in-law. And I don't refer to them as father-in-law and mother-in-law. I just call them mom and dad, and they feel like they are. The same was true here. And so, verse 9, Naomi goes on to her daughters-in-law, or just daughters as she felt of them. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Now, wait a minute. The house of their husbands are gone. Naomi knows that. She referred to that in the previous verse. You have dealt with the dead incredibly kindly. You were good wives. You have dealt with me incredibly kindly. You've been amazing daughters-in-law. I pray that our God, even though he's not your God, will deal kindly with you. All that was verse 8. And then verse 9, here's this prayer to be a little more specific. How might the God of Israel bless you in helping you find rest in the house of a husband? And what Naomi assumed is that husband would be a Moabite right here in your land. There's no reason for you to go back with me. There's nothing there for you. There's nothing I can give you. And so may you find rest here. And a new beginning, a fresh start, remarriage among your own people. People that haven't suffered quite as much as the Israelites have for this last little while. Now, the word rest, that was what the Israelites were seeking when they left Egypt. Well, that's what they were seeking as they went through Moab the first time on their way to the Promised Land, to enter into the rest of the Lord. Which rest, D&C 84 defines, is the fullness of God's glory. Well, Naomi was going to get more than she asked for in that prayer, because the Lord did want to give his children rest in terms of a fullness of glory. And that wasn't just a remarriage in Moab. There's something more than that. But here in verse 9 and then in verse 10, I want you to ask yourself these questions. When Naomi says that to Ruth and Orpah, what's that going to mean for them, Ruth and Orpah, versus what's that going to mean for her, as in Naomi? By saying, stay and find a new husband, and may the Lord of Israel, the God of Israel, bless you and give you rest. For Ruth and Orpah, that's going to mean wonderful things. Like I said, a fresh start, a new beginning, security, and a husband to provide for them. But what is that going to mean for Naomi? If Ruth and Orpah take her up on her suggestion, total loneliness. I've lost everything, my husband, my 2 sons. And if you'll take my advice, I'll lose my 2 daughters-in-law as well. And how on earth I will provide for myself? Being a woman in the ancient world was difficult, but being a widow was even worse. Throughout Exodus, we saw it over and over, the Lord saying, make sure you are careful the way you treat widows and the fatherless. And the strangers he's going to bring up as well. Foreigners. Well, this story is about all of that. Widows, foreigners. God has a soft spot in his heart for the destitute, the vulnerable, those that have no one to provide for them but him. And that's exactly what Naomi is suggesting for herself if they follow her advice. There's selflessness personified in this weeping widow who is not quite feeling the weight of her name. There's no delight here. Nothing seems pleasant. But at least there might be some pleasantness for you. And it's them that she's thinking of. Verse 10, the roles reverse. Actually, finish verse 9 first. Then she, Naomi, kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. This was going to be a hard departure. In fact, they didn't want there to be a departure at all. That's why verse 10 says, they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. Now there's true sisterhood. There's loving support. But again, what would that have meant for each party? If they stuck with what they said in 10, for Naomi, that would be wonderful news. The exact reversal of what she had suggested back in verse 9. No, Naomi, we're here for you. And thus, in your old age, since it's probably far beyond the chance for you to get remarried and be provided for, allow us to provide for you in our own way. We'll come and be your support. But if that's good news for Naomi, what does it mean for Ruth and Orpah? Is it bad news for them? Because they will be giving up any opportunity to be married to a fellow Moabite. They've been living at home this whole time, these 10 past years. But for them to uproot with no promise of a future in Israel, in some way, again, as we've seen repeatedly, Israelites weren't supposed to marry outside the covenant. And so, what were Mahlon and Chilion doing to begin with, taking on Ruth and Orpah? There's something selfless again here from the other side. Hot potato, like I said. Ruth and Naomi is saying, it's not about me, it's about you. And Ruth and Orpah are saying, no, it's not about us, it's about you. Beautiful selflessness here. But Naomi's not going to have anything of it. Verse 11, she says, turn again, my daughters, and not in-law, just my daughters, why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. More selflessness on Naomi's part. These marriage ties that had bound her to her daughters-in-law had been dissolved, like I said, and so it's going to be every woman for herself. No, not as far as Ruth and Orpah are concerned. Every man for himself, that was judges doing what was right in their own eyes. It's not going to be every woman for herself. It's selflessness on their part. But the way Naomi says it gives you a clue as to what she's thinking, or perhaps what she's thinking Ruth and Orpah are thinking. When she says, I'm too old to have an husband. Well, what does that have to do with them? If she's trying to convince them to stay, that's the last thing that they would want to hear. I know you're too old to have a husband. That's why you need us, daughters-in-law, to help support you. But it's clarified in verse 12. She goes on, if I should say I have hope to have a husband, and despite my advanced age, if I should say that, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, now is where it turns to Ruth and Orpah. Would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. Now there's a lot to unpack in those verses. If I have hope, which suggests that Naomi has none, that she is in a hopeless condition, but she wants to keep that hopelessness to herself. She doesn't want to spread it to people that she loves. At the end there, when it says, it grieveth me for your sake, I'm more concerned about you than I am about myself. My heart breaks because of what you've gone through. You lost your husbands. Although she could have easily said, those were my sons. You had them for 10 years. I've had them their entire lives. I know what it feels like to be a widow since I lost my husband, but also to have lost my 2 boys. Naomi's loss is so much greater than Ruth's or Orpah's, but she doesn't put it in those terms. It grieves me for your sake. I think too often in our attempts to be empathetic, we end up just talking about the hard things we've been through. We sometimes try to offer a comforting comparison that doesn't end up comforting very well. Oh, I've had it worse. So you should feel better about the situation you're in. No, Naomi doesn't make that mistake. She doesn't say, I've had it worse, and so be grateful for what you've got and go on living. No, I'm hopeless, but I'm more worried about your hopelessness. And so have some hope and go back. And your hope shouldn't be in me giving you children, or giving you husbands. I did that when I was young. I can no longer do that now that I'm old. Oh, one other thing. When it says at the end, it grieveth me for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. Now, we're going to see this more clearly in the book of Job. That in Job, there's this sense, and we see it in the Book of Mormon. I think we all kind of assume it in ourselves, unfortunately. It's that if bad things happen, it's because you deserved them. And the whole book of Job, we'll get there in a while, will completely turn that on its head in important ways. But Naomi is under the same understanding. It's true in some ways, in some cases. We saw this, I've set before you life and death, and so choose life. If you obey, you're blessed. If you disobey, you're cursed. Well, that's true, but flip it around. Oh, I've been cursed, so I must have disobeyed. That's the part where the logic falls apart. Okay, that's the part where the reality isn't quite true. And so here's Naomi blaming herself. No wonder she's hopeless. Hopeless for a future for herself. If my present is so abysmal because of something that I've done wrong, the hand of the Lord is against me. Was it because I left Israel? I should have had greater faith that God would assuage the famine there and send rain. Was it because I allowed my sons to marry outside of the covenant and marry Moabitesses? What? I've done something wrong, and it's my fault. And unfortunately, the consequences of my poor decisions haven't just affected me. They've affected everyone around me. And so I am sorry, my daughters. Go save yourselves, and I will go face my punishment alone. One last thing. Would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Again, what she's getting at is it's too late for me to give you another set of husbands. And since our in-law relationship has dissolved, there's no relationship left. And I can't give you another one to resurrect it. That would be a miracle on the par of Sarah giving birth to Isaac in her old age. And even if that were possible, she's hinting at in these verses, even if I could, let's put it best case scenario. Let's say I did have hope, all the hope in the world, and we've rushed back to Israel. I find a husband on day one, and this wonderful man that wants a little old lady as his wife. Let's say we get married on day 2, and then we get pregnant on day 3, and I give birth to twin sons on 9 months and 3 days in. Maybe they're even a little premature to speed up the process. I don't know. But if that were best case scenario, would you still be willing to tarry for them until they were old enough to marry you and give you posterity, which in fact my own sons were never able to give you? Ruth and Orpah had no children. There seems to be barrenness on that side of things. We'll see a change of that later. But you see what she's getting at? Even best case scenario, would you be willing to wait that long? I mean, I'm grateful for your loyalty, but doesn't loyalty have limits and time constraints that I can only stick around for so long? And yet, I'm amazed by people who are willing to tarry and stay in difficult circumstances in order to selflessly offer whatever they have to give to other people who are in need. I was about to say in greater need, but it might even be lesser need. And yet, what's Ruth going to prove? I'm going to go with you. We'll see that unfold in just a second, but to tarry, to stay, to wait. I've got a brother-in-law who's just as good as gold. A brother that feels more like a brother than a brother-in-law. And when he was in college, he went on his mission, he returned, phenomenal return missionary, ready for the next mission in life, which needed an eternal companion. And he did everything within his power, dating and meeting people. And he was he's an amazing person, but it just wasn't happening. And he wasn't finding his eternal companion yet. And we all wondered why. Well, he especially wondered why. But what was amazing is to see what he did in the meantime with his roommates. He wanted to have a single roommate, his married roommate. He wanted to find a spouse. And yet what he did among his roommates with companionship scripture study and companion apartment prayer, continuing the life of a missionary post-mission and rallying the troops and helping them spiritually through the whole process. 2 of his younger brothers ended up becoming his roommates later on. And the kind of spiritual influence he had upon them, I know that if you asked him, was it worth tarrying for them? Was it worth staying? I know it wasn't technically your choice. If you could have been married earlier, you would have been. But making the best of a difficult situation and staying in that holding pattern where you had a profound effect upon your younger brothers. I know that he would say, yes, it was worth tarrying for them. And now he has an incredible wife and 4 amazing little boys, and life is good for him. But to me, again, there's something powerful about being willing to stay in holding patterns. Looking around with every lap, not just for the blessings that seem to keep passing you by, but for the way you can be a blessing to people in need all around you. It's exactly what Ruth is going to be willing to do. In verse 14, these 2 daughters-in-law, lifted up their voice and wept again. There's still this heartbreak. Are they weeping for themselves, thinking that, how's that going to work if we go forward? Are they, perhaps, they're definitely weeping for Naomi, knowing that what their decision, if they end up opting for their own future, will destroy the future of Naomi. There's tears all around, and they're all justified. But then this, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. I love pointing out to my young students that there is a difference between kissing and cleaving. There is a difference between compassion, which both women feel, and companionship, which only one woman is willing to offer. Again, I am not trying to demonize Orpah. She's wonderful. Her heart is in the right place. She has been side by side with Ruth this whole time, with Naomi this whole time. But when it finally came down to it, her decision was practical, to be honest. It was pragmatic. Those are 2 of my gifts, so it makes me worried or wonder, would I have done the same? You're right. How much good can I do you? A lot, but at what expense to myself? And as we're balancing out the scales, then perhaps it really would be wiser all the way around. I'm really sorry, Naomi. I weep for you. I wish there was more that I could do. But you're right. And for my own future's sake, I have to move on. Now, there may be times in our life where that is true. This is a hard one, and I'm not going to pass judgment on anyone who makes a decision one way or the other. They have to make that difficult decision, and I pray that the Lord is part of the decision-making process. But while Orpah kisses and leaves, Ruth cleaves and stays. Like I said, there's a difference between compassion, I feel with you, and companionship, I'm going to stay with you. And feeling for someone versus honestly staying with them. And you can't get rid of me that easily. No, this is selflessness to the very core on Ruth's part. Verse 15, Mother, Naomi, says to Ruth, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people, unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. Your nationality should bind you to your nation. You're a Moabitess, stay in Moab. Your religion should keep you centered here with your own Moabite gods. And look at your sister-in-law, Orpah. She was the practical one. She was pragmatic. She did what was best for her, just like I suggested, just like I encouraged. You should do the same. And Ruth could have. But she says in 16 and 17, famous verses, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. So please don't ask me again to leave. When we quit this going back and forth, insisting that the other person should put themselves first, no, I'm putting my foot down, Mom. Please quit asking me to leave. For whither thou goest, I will go. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, thy God, my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord, that's your God, Jehovah, the Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. I don't know if there's a more powerful verse on loyalty and companionship in all of Scripture than that. Spoken not by an Israelite, but to an Israelite. By someone outside the house of Israel who, in these words, is willing to come in. This is a verse of true conversion. And it's not just conversion to God, it's companionship with his people. This is the two great commandments. This is setting up the cross, the vertical. I want to have your God as mine. And the horizontal, I want your people to be my people because you are mine, mother. And I will care for you as you cared for me, as you cared for my husband from birth onward. There's such power here. If you take each verb and couple it, there's these three pairs that I think are powerful. Where you go, I'll go, and where you lodge, I'll lodge. Now, it's one thing to go with somebody and get them to their destination, and then we good? Can you handle it from here? Because I got to go back. No, to take go and then sanctify it even higher. Lodge. I'm going to stay with you. The next set. Thy people and thy God. So again, it's one thing to just to claim the neighbors, or when in Rome, do as the Romans do, but I'm not a Roman. Well, no, I'm going to go and be an Israelite in deed, and not only in name. I will take your people as my own. And if that's not enough, just the social sphere. The religious one is even deeper. Social, it's like when people say we're not supposed to talk about religion or politics. And it's like, oh, well, how dare we talk about politics because that's how we think society should go. And how dare we talk about religion since that's how we view reality itself. Well, she's willing to do both. She's willing to talk politics and as far as change her social structure. I'll be an Israelite, just like you are. And even deeper, to change her religious worldview. Reality itself. I see things as you do. And then the last pair, where you die, I'll die. And again, sanctify it, take it up a notch. Where you are buried, I'll be buried too. Do you remember Joseph of Egypt and his father Jacob, both of whom died in Egypt, but made their posterity swear, do not leave me buried here. Eventually, you're going to get out of Egypt and head back to our promised land. Dig me up and take my bones with you, because I refuse to be buried permanently outside my promised land. It was a big deal in the ancient world where you were buried. Remember the great sacrifice Abraham made to find a place of burial for his beloved Sarah. Now, to think of what Ruth is offering here, it's not just a momentary go. It's a willingness to stay and lodge. And it's not just lodge for a while. It's lodge until death itself. This is a permanent change. And not just till death do we part. Even after death, I will stay with you. I'll be buried alongside you. I am going to hitch my wagon to yours and go wherever it leads. And if I don't, notice how she says at the end, then may God, your God, that you think has punished you for whatever you think you've done wrong. Well, this is my sense of what I would be doing wrong if I abandoned you here in your moment of greatest need. And so I won't do it. And if I did, then God could do to me even more than whatever you think he's done to you. I'm willing to risk that because I will not risk my relationship with you. I am so moved by those verses, what Ruth has said there. I am willing to put my life on hold to give you comfort and help and blessings. And I can't think of a more Christ-like thing to do. I can't think of a more motherly thing to do for this childless Ruth who's about to become a mother in Israel by the end of her story. Oh, beautiful. In verse 18, when she, Naomi, saw that she, Ruth, was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. She finally relented. And how could she not be? This is going to be a battle of wills. And they both seem to be iron. It was, no, you first, no, you first, no, you first, no, you. And finally, when Naomi saw Ruth's celestial stubbornness, can we call it that? Here it was steadfastly minded. It's like, whoa, you're not going to take no for an answer. You even told me, quit asking. I've said this before. I see this when my father-in-law and my brothers-in-law go out to dinner, and it is the ultimate hot potato on who's going to put the other person first or flip it around. It is a true tug of war over the bill, and there's no way you're going to pay. And I've seen my brother-in-law call the restaurant on the way in from a different vehicle that my father-in-law is in, just to tell the waitress, this old man's going to come in and try to convince you to let him pay. You are not to do that. Take his credit card, that's fine. Pretend like you're going his way. But here's my credit card over the phone, and I'm going to pay for it in advance. Okay? I mean, I'm surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if he said, I will buy your restaurant to make sure that the bill's on me rather than on someone else. And eventually, in this battle of wills, somebody has to lose. And Naomi realizes, I'm going to lose this no matter what. So I might as well lose graciously. And she left, speaking unto her. I think there's humility and power in relenting when someone is just trying to serve you in a Christ-like way. I know they say better to give than to receive, but in order for someone to give, somebody's got to receive. And I know that's hard for us, pioneer stock, and you do it yourself, and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and no, I'm going to put somebody else first. Give them a chance. Don't be selfish in your selflessness. And here you see Naomi being willing to be first in someone else's life, despite the fact she had wanted the roles to be reversed. Selflessness through and through. Verse 19. So they two went until they came to Bethlehem, back to the house of bread. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them. And they said, is this Naomi? Now here you get a sense of the kind of person she had always been. Remember, if I had hope, it's hopeless for me. I have nothing to go back to, but at least there's food and the famine has ended. Well, I have a feeling that she underestimated herself. And that's true of people who tend to put other people before themselves habitually. No, when Naomi gets home, everyone, the whole city just, is Naomi back? Oh, we have missed you these years, but you're home again. And we're delighted to see you. Remember, Naomi's name means delight. Well, verse 20, she plays that in reverse. She says to them, call me not Naomi. I'm not very pleasant anymore. I don't have anything to delight in. Call me Mara, which means bitter. Remember the waters of Mara back in the book of Exodus? I have only the bitter tears that are flowing now. For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. Again, probably considering herself guilty of some misdoing that has caused God to justifiably take away everything that matters from her. She describes it in verse 21. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? Sharing the common misperception of the time, that, like I said, we'll see in Job, she blamed herself for everything, and it is God testifying against me. I have no reason to delight over anything. I am Mara. I am bitter through and through. Verse 22, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. And thus chapter 1 ends. But again, how do the people perceive her? Oh, Ruth the Moabitess. Naomi, it's really her? So excited to have you back. Who's this? She's not one of us. Even after the passage of 10 years plus, we remember you, but we don't know this person. Oh, but we know enough. She's a Moabitess. She's not one of us. She's a non-member. And I worry sometimes that we define people by what they're not, instead of honoring them for what they are. We're going to see that perception change over the next few chapters. But the way chapter 2 begins, again, it's barley harvest. That'll come and be important in a moment. Verse 1, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz, which means that Naomi wasn't as alone as she had assumed she would be. Like I said, there is a town full of friends that are so excited to have you back. There also seems to still be some family related to your husband Elimelech. And this one, this kinsman, Boaz, is a mighty man and incredibly wealthy. You could have been provided for. Makes you wonder if Ruth is going to second guess herself. Wait a second, Mom, you're going to be just fine. I can go back and follow Orpah's pragmatic example. No, she doesn't. Verse 2, Ruth the Moabitess, so that non-member, said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field. Not go back to mine, go to Boaz's. Let me go to the field and glean ears of corn after him in whose sight I shall find grace. And she, Naomi, said unto her, go, my daughter. Now, as far as Israelite culture is concerned, and Israelite law, you have to allow the poor to glean in your field. That was the social safety net that was set up. That was welfare. And it wasn't that we had to give them anything, but we should at least provide for them to take something for themselves. And so as we go through the harvest, do a good job harvesting your fields, but leave the corners alone so that people have something to subsist upon. And yes, be thorough, but not so thorough that you go back and gather every grain. Do your work, but allow for some leftovers. And then the poor have something to provide for themselves. Well, I don't know how much a non-Israelite understands that. That seems to be a very selfless, like I said, social safety net as far as Israelites are concerned. So that's why I wonder about Ruth's language. I'll go to the field of him in whose sight I shall find grace. I really hope there's someone out there actually kind enough to let me glean. That also suggests perhaps she knows just how awful people have become during these pride cycles. Because if there's so much idolatry in the land, and that was the first of the 10 Commandments, no other gods before me. If they're willing to break that one, then imagine how easily they would break this lesser one, especially since this is another chance to be self-serving. I can make sure there's nothing left for the poor because it's all meant for me. No, Ruth is going to rely upon the grace of someone. And I hope someone is gracious enough to allow me. In verse 3, she went, she came, she gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on the part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. Now her hap, we would say she happened to go reap in Boaz's field. Oh, it just so happened. What a coincidence. Of all the fields in Bethlehem, wow, that this Moabitess would stumble upon, friendly territory. Someone who would see her with grace, or at least see her mother-in-law with grace. We're related after all. Well, was it mere coincidence? Or was this a tender mercy of God? He's the ultimate one who sees us with grace, and we find grace in his sight. In verse 5, then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, whose damsel is this? So someone must be taking care of her. Who does she belong to? Whose servant is she? The servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, well, it's the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. I don't know her name. She's just a non-member. She's a Moabitess. But this is what she said, verse 7. She said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. Now, she didn't even have to ask. According to the law of Moses, it's your right to be able to go and glean. But whether it was, I just don't understand that law, or that's got to be too good to be true, or this is my favorite one. I will not presume upon someone's grace. The way Paul talks about that in Romans, he calls it despising the riches of God's goodness. Presuming upon his grace. He said he'd forgive me, so put it on Jesus' tab. Oh, be careful about that. And here, among the poor, though they are entitled to help, she never ended up with a sense of entitlement. There's humility there, and there's hard work there. As the servant says, she's been there all day. She started from the morning, she's been doing it all the way until now. At the end there where it says that she tarried a little in the house, that's a tough translation. Basically, she's just saying she took a brief rest in a shelter, just to get out of the heat of the sun. But then once she was revived, she went right back out to keep going. This is a hard worker. This is someone who doesn't have a sense of entitlement. This is someone who asks for something she doesn't even have to ask for. This Moabitess seems, I don't even know her name, but she seems as good as gold. Verse 8, then said Boaz unto Ruth. So now we get a name. Boaz approaches her and communicates with her directly, probably so impressed, like, who is this person? I got to meet this girl for myself and find out, whose damsel are you? What part of the family are you from? He says to Ruth, hearest thou not my daughter? He just learned that she came back with Naomi. Naomi is related to Boaz, and so he's seeing a familial connection here also, my daughter. Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Here's an offer of continual support, just like Ruth had offered Naomi. I won't just go, I will lodge. I won't just live with you, I'll die with you. I'm staying for the duration. And the bread she's cast upon the waters has returned unto her. And it didn't even take many days. The way she treated Naomi is now coming back to bless her in the way Boaz treats her, Ruth. And so stay here. It's interesting to think of, again, the social safety net, but thinking, seriously, do they have to keep coming every time to my field? There's lots of other fields here. And so, didn't I already feed you yesterday? Go somewhere else. No, there's no tiring here. Stay here. Don't glean anywhere else. Abide fast by my maidens. I see in that Boaz as a type of Christ. Again, there's not a presuming upon his grace on Ruth's part. So there's no limit to what I'm willing to offer you on Boaz's part. And the same is true of our relationship with the Lord, especially when it comes to sin and repentance and forgiveness. As long as I don't presume upon his grace and just say, put it on Jesus' tab and he always forgives me. No, if it's, please, I pray you, let me glean in your field. Will you forgive me once again? It's then that the Lord can say, as Boaz did. And as Alma tells us at the end of the book of Mosiah, as often as my people repent, I will forgive them. No matter how many times you come back seeking the bread of life, it's what I am. It's what I'm here for. So please keep coming. In verse 9, Boaz continues, let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them, after my damsels, after my servants. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. I love Boaz here. Think about the proclamation to the world on the family. And what does it say the role of a husband or father is? To preside, provide, and protect. Those 3 Ps. He's trying to help us men with a mnemonic device. Okay, don't forget. Well, to preside, we don't have to worry about that yet. Boaz ultimately will become Ruth's husband. Oh, spoiler alert, that's chapter 4. But to see the other 2 Ps, the provide and protect, we see it in those verses. Come anytime you need food and glean in my fields. I will always provide for you. And it's not just the food, it's the drink also. And you don't even have to go to the well and draw it yourself. Let the men do that, okay? This is the role reversal of Rebekah and Abraham's servant. Let the young men draw the water, and you go drink it straight out of the vessel anytime you're thirsty, especially if you're going to be out here from morning till night as you've been today. Yeah, feel free to go under the shelter anytime you need some shade. Feel free to get water anytime you need it. Feel free to gather grain to make bread for you and for your mother-in-law. And be assured that not only am I providing, I'm also protecting. Like I said, the challenge of a woman in the ancient Near East, especially a widow or a single sister, it's not just how do I provide for myself, it's also how do I protect myself. We saw the way the book of Judges ended and the horrific story of the concubine of the Levite, where there was no protection, only abuse, only assault. There was real danger there, and this happened in the days the judges reigned. And so I will command my young men never to touch you. You will be safe here, under the shadow of my roof. In verse 10, what's Ruth's response? She fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground, as we should do before our Boaz, our Savior, our Christ. She says to him, "Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldst take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger, a non-Israelite?" That's the word for it. Again, do you see yourself in Ruth? And do you see the Lord in Boaz? Falling before him, bowing upon the ground, and wondering in grateful disbelief, how could you look upon me with kindness? How have I found grace in thy sight? Remember, that was what she was praying for. I just hope I hap upon the field of someone who might be gracious. And that's exactly what happened. But you took knowledge of me? Oh, my daughter, you called me. You saw a relationship where everyone else only seems to see distance and non-member stranger status. I don't know, maybe when you were a teenager, did you ever get noticed by someone that seemed out of your league? And just how that felt, that they noticed me? Or maybe even more, they know my name? How is that even possible? And to feel that way, Ruth feels it toward Boaz, this mighty man of wealth. And for us to feel that toward the Lord, he knows who I am. Those are incredible experiences. But again, how did she see herself? I am a stranger. That's the first time she's used that word. But it's a common word in the Old Testament. And again, it means foreigner. I'm not one of you, and yet you treated me like I was? That's amazing to me. To think about, again, throughout the Old Testament, provide for the widow, provide for the fatherless, provide for the stranger in your midst. Treat them as one of the family. And again, in terms of Boaz as Christ, think about this famous verse from Matthew chapter 25. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Ruth had been all of these things. I was hungry, so I gleaned, and you let me. I was thirsty, and you told me to go to the vessels and skip the well. I was a stranger. I still am. And yet you took me in. You recognized me. You honored me for who I am, not just where I'm from. No wonder Ruth, again, this is Matthew chapter 1, the genealogy of Jesus. No wonder Ruth is one of the 5 women mentioned by name. When Jesus says, I was a hungered, I was athirst, I was a stranger, I was Ruth. And I claim her as one of my ancestors. And to see him wanting to claim us, if we'll just be willing to claim him. In verse 11, Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother and the land of thy nativity, ultimate self-sacrifice, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. I don't look down upon you because you're a stranger. I look up to you because you're a stranger. You're willing to leave all of that behind, leave what you knew, and come to start over? Wow, that's amazing. It actually hurts my heart sometimes to meet, for example, Latin American immigrants who have come to the United States and are striving valiantly to make a living for themselves and provide for their loved ones, and yet face so much prejudice, so sometimes disdain or just false assumptions, even being looked down upon because their English has a Spanish accent. And this isn't just true of Latin America. It can be immigrants from anywhere in the world. Part of me wants to push back against anyone looking down their noses, saying, oh, you look down because they have a Spanish accent? They speak Spanish natively, but they're speaking your language as a second language. Cut them some slack, for crying out loud. How good's your Spanish? Do you still have a gringo accent when you try? Or do you not try at all? I'm so grateful that Boaz looks up to someone that everyone else seems to look down upon. You've left it all to come. That is courage. That's loyalty. That is love. How can I not be impressed? In fact, I've heard about this. It hath fully been showed me. Your reputation precedes you. And it's a reputation for incredible self-sacrifice. How can I not sacrifice to honor you? One other thing, this is the story of every convert to the church who has come to a point in their lives where they have said to Israel, thy people shall be my people. As weird as you are sometimes. And thy God will be my God, because I've come to know him here in ways that I never had before. But that courage to come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore, and all of the culture shock that goes along with that, the foreign language, so to speak, that you have to learn to speak Mormonese with a Catholic accent or a Protestant accent or whatever accent you came from. It's a powerful thing. And I hope you sense my gratitude, just how impressed I am to anyone who has done that. The church is a better place for you coming in. And Israel's a better place for Ruth having come here too. So Boaz blesses her in verse 12. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. That verse, chapter 2, verse 12, is one that we have to hold on to for the rest of our story. A few things to unpack. First, the Lord recompense thy work. To recompense there means to repay. It's the same word in Hebrew used throughout the Exodus, for example, about making restitution for sin. So God is going to recompense you. He's going to give you a full reward, a complete wage. You're nobody's servant here, okay? You're going to receive all that the Lord has to offer you. Why? Because you have trusted in him. In fact, you've come to trust his wings. Think about that metaphor. How oft would I have gathered you as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings? But ye would not, is how the Lord always ends that. He wouldn't have to say it to Ruth, though. But you would come under. I called, I clucked, I raised my wings, and you came running. You have come to seek refuge here. and you are trying to provide shelter for Naomi, allow me to provide shelter to you. You're not just trusting in Boaz's generosity. You're trusting in the goodness of God. Now, one thing you have to hold on to that we'll see in a moment, so tuck this away. Wing in Hebrew, yes, the word here, yes, it means the wing, like from a hen. But it also is the same word used for any kind of extremity. It's used for the ends of the earth or the four corners of the world. Same word. It's used for the hem of a robe or garment. When the Jews were told to have a blue fringe or a blue hem around the robe and fringes there to remind them of God. Well, that's the wing. That's the skirt. That's the edge. I'm extending as far as I possibly can. The reach of the Redeemer. And to the ends of the earth, to the extremes of things. That's how far my wings will reach. By the way, that hem, that skirt, that edge, that's the exact part that another woman without any hope, sound like Naomi? Sound like Ruth? This woman with the issue of blood reached out to touch the furthest feather of the hen's wing. She touched the hem of the Savior's garment, and virtue flowed into her, out from that furthest extremity of Christ. There's something beautiful here about what she is trusting in. And again, tuck it away, because we're going to see that word again translated differently. Verse 13, then she said, let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord. She already had. For that thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid, though I be not like one of thine handmaidens. How does she refer to herself? Thine handmaid, in other words, thy servant. You are willing to treat me like one of your own servants, even though I'm not one of them. I'm an outsider. I'm a foreigner. I am a stranger. Oh, but stranger, I take you in. You're no longer a foreigner, but a fellow citizen with the saints. There's Paul's language to converts, Gentiles that are now part of the house of Israel. So many powerful examples here. I found favor. You spoke friendly. Do we speak friendly to people to whom we owe no friendship? Boaz did. Do we speak kindly to people that other people assume deserve no kindness? We should. By the way, that word kindly comes from the Hebrew word for heart, or inner man or woman. You have spoken kindly, she could have said, you have spoken to the heart. And I hope we can do that for the poor and for the stranger, for the outcast, for the forgotten, for the vulnerable. Not just to recognize need and turn a blind eye and write a check and give it the office, but to speak to their hearts. I see that in my wife as she works with addicts, many of whom are homeless. And to see in her, I got to go to her work one day to help her move some things in her office and to meet some of the people that she's working with. And just to see nothing but full acceptance and love. No difference, no distance. It's a beautiful thing. It is grace, it is kindness, and she is reaching the heart, the inner person. It's the only hope we have to change. And so if we're hoping to reach someone, whether they've left the church, whether they're struggling in sin, whether they are just distant from the family, it's the heart we're going to have to aim for. We're going to have to speak friendly. We're going to have to speak kindly. We can't treat them differently. In verse 14, Boaz says to her, at mealtime come thou hither, and eat of the bread. So it's not just gather the grain and then make bread yourself. If you're hungry, come, eliminate all the middleman and all that middle work. Just come and eat bread. In fact, dip thy morsel in the vinegar. Now there's an added treat, far beyond the mere minimum of allowing someone to gather your leftovers. The best I have is yours for the taking. I'm offering you that. Again, to see what Boaz as type of Christ, and Christ reaching down even to our lowly level and saying, come partake of the bread of life. Dip the morsel in the vinegar. Vinegar, there's the fruit of the vine. It's just soured, right? Think about bread and wine. Here's the sacrament table being laid out before you. And though you have made mistakes, though you have distanced yourself from my table, come. Come boldly to the throne of grace, to this mercy seat, to the sacrificial altar, to the sacrament table, and take bread. Eat of my bread. Dip it in my vinegar. That those bitter tears, the bitter cup that I partook of to the dregs, come and feast upon what I am offering you. Boaz is such a perfect metaphor for all that Christ is doing for us. Ruth, meanwhile, sat beside the reapers. He reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. Now, that's a bad translation. Sorry, King James translators. Others, it says he reached her parched corn. No, he reached out to her with the parched corn, the parched grain. These roasted kernels. This is an extra treat. We've already cooked some things. Come and eat, have bread, dip it in the vinegar. Here's some roasted grain. And eat all you want. When it says she ate and was sufficed and left, again, that's the worst part of the translation. It's just not that she left, it's that she had some leftovers. So again, Boaz is going so far above and beyond the minimum, just like the Lord does for us. Eat to your fill. This is the loaves and the fishes. I am multiplying them for you. And the multitude ate and was filled, and there were still 12 baskets left over. Since I'm assuming you're probably going to get hungry later. And that's the case for Ruth. And not just for Ruth, for Naomi also. In verse 15 and 16, when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean. Again, he's trying to protect and not just provide. But how's this for provide? Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. In fact, let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. You see what Boaz is saying there to his servants? We're all going to go above and beyond on this one. Okay, this foreigner, this stranger, she doesn't know how we do things here. Okay, so we're going to need to be extra reassuring. She's not presuming upon anybody's grace. And so we need to remind her, no, it's all good. It's all good. And in fact, in her case, let her glean among the sheaves. So the stuff you've already harvested, rather than having to go through the corners of the field or just go and pick up whatever the leftovers are, let her come to the granary itself and take whatever she wants. In fact, in case that's too intimidating for her, while you're gathering grain for my granaries, why don't you accidentally drop some, okay? It's not going to be accidental. That's what he says there. Let some of the handfuls fall of purpose. In other words, on purpose. Here she is just picking up a grain here and a grain there, whatever was left. And all of a sudden there's this big pile. How did this drop out? Okay, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, my servants. We're going to make sure she has plenty. And twice he says, don't reproach her, don't rebuke her. Especially since she's new here. Let her learn, let her grow, let her figure things out. It is culture shock, joining the church. It is gradual becoming bilingual. It's making sense of a new people and a new God that you've chosen for yourself. And I think we can do a much better job of not rebuking and not reproaching when someone else's spirituality looks a little different than ours. I love what Joseph Smith said when people didn't believe him and they accused him of making up the first vision and all these things. It says, they should have been my friends. And if they thought I was wrong, they should have tried to reclaim me in a proper and affectionate manner. We can do better at that. People that are struggling in their faith, people that have left the church, we can be friends. We can be proper and affectionate in the way that we treat them. We can reproach them not and rebuke them not. And just hold out love and hope. That's what Boaz did and commanded his servants to do likewise. If Boaz, is Jesus, then who are the servants here? That's us. And what is he commanding us to do? Give, be generous, be kind, be merciful, be patient. Just be like me. You're my servant after all. And we can be more Christ-like. In verse 17 and 18, so she gleaned in the field until even, again, sun up till sundown. She beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. She took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her what she had reserved after she was sufficed. That extra then was meant for Naomi. Now, details here. An ephah of barley. Okay, how much is that? It's like if you don't know how to cook and you're like, what's the difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon again? Well, if they're calling for a teaspoon of salt, make sure you didn't pull out the tablespoon. Okay, we need to know our weights and measures here. Well, back when we were learning about manna, there was a lot of talk of how much there would be. And it said that every day they would gather an omer of manna. And an omer was enough to get through an entire day. I can subsist upon an omer's worth of manna. In this case, an omer's worth of barley or wheat or whatever the grain might be. But it also says in that discussion of manna that 10 omers makes up an ephah. So again, forget about size and things. Think about how long can I live on it. And if an omer gets me through a day, then an ephah would get me through 10 days. And how much grain did Ruth glean in that one day's worth of work? 10 days worth of sustenance. Oh yeah, these servants are dropping handfuls by accident, on purpose. Glean among the sheaves. Come and get some bread and some vinegar, and maybe she did, and therefore wasn't hungry and didn't need any of that grain for herself. But whatever she ate and was filled, and there was still some left over, she brings it all back to provide for Naomi. That's why she came back to Israel to begin with. Okay? Naomi is shocked by all of this. What on earth? How did you get so much food? Verse 19, she says to her, where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Now, that's either a shock like, uh-oh, you must have done something wrong. I should have explained this better. I shouldn't have just let it to chance, to hap. Where did you go? You're not supposed to go straight into a granary, just the corners of the field. Then again, it might be, who on earth out there is so generous? Because most of the poor that go glean in the fields, you're lucky to get through your day. Remember the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Give us just enough to get through today. And the poor, it's going to be on an absolute subsistence level. They're still probably going to bed hungry, just waiting for sunup so they can go glean again. But no, who on earth is so gracious and good as to give with such generosity? Where did you go? Naomi says, blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And then Ruth showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought. She said, the man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. Now that name's going to ring some bells for Naomi. Like, seriously? No way. What are the chances? No coincidence here. Verse 20, Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, the man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. Can you believe that? You happed upon the perfect place, because he's one of us. We belong to him. Oh, thank you, God, for providing in such a beautiful, personal way. And even the way she says it, he didn't leave off his kindness to the living or to the dead. Some people's kindness lasts till death do you part. Not Ruth's. Even with the loss of her husband, I'm still with you, Naomi. And here God doesn't just end things. He's continuing to provide things even after the death of my husband. And here Boaz will honor Elimelech, not just during Elimelech's life, but after Elimelech's death. He will provide for those that have been left behind. My aunt passed away unexpectedly just a few weeks ago, and it came as a shock to all of us. she and I were really close, especially the last few years. We compared scriptural notes all the time. She'd say, "You keep wearing the same ties. Let me send you a new one." She was just a wonderful fan of the scriptures, and we talked about it often. It was at the funeral, and her husband, I'm not related to, technically, but that relationship will outlast the life of the person that I'm blood kin to. And I felt the same when I got to meet one of my aunt's friends at the funeral. And though my friendship to her seemed only to be, well, there's a middle woman. You're not a friend to me, you're a friend to my friend. Or she's a friend to my aunt, and so we're separated, we're removed. No. We shouldn't leave off our kindness at death, but allow it to go far beyond. That's what eternal families and eternal friendships are meant to be for. One other thing here, when it says he's our next kinsman, there's something about family. And do we provide, do we protect, do we honor, do we love, are we loyal to, even if we barely know them? Yeah, but it's some distant relationship. You ever been to a family reunion and half the people you don't know, but you feel connected to them? I was asked to speak at a Malin family reunion, and most of the people there still have the last name Malin. For me, it was daughter to daughter to daughter to daughter, and eventually came to me, and our last names changed every generation. But I went and was surrounded by strangers. That's the word for a foreigner, for Ruth. But boy, did we feel like family. And it was a beautiful thing. My wife, actually, it was funny, when we moved to Tennessee, this was new to all of us, but then as my sister-in-law especially was doing some family history, she realized that they're Tennesseans for generations, and just a few generations removed from Tennessee. When we found out, I just laughed and turned to my wife and said, "You're the one coming home. I married myself a Southern belle," and what an honor. But it was funny, one time that sister-in-law, my wife's little sister, came out to visit, and the two of them went back to the ancestral home. They wanted to go back and see, okay, they were in this part of Tennessee, and they drove out there, middle of nowhere, but wanted to find, are there any grave markers? Can we see anything? Well, they were used to like city cemeteries, and that's not the Old South, where it's just somebody buried at the edge of some farmer's field. Well, they went into town, into like a diner or someplace. One of those little towns with no traffic signals, right? But they found a place where maybe there's some old timers here who might know the lay of the land. They went in and looked for the oldest guy at the diner and sat down with him and said, or introduced themselves first and said, "Excuse me, I hate to interrupt your lunch, but we have ancestors that lived here in this town, and we're just wondering if maybe you've heard of this family or could point us in the direction of where they might have lived." I know this is a long shot, and this is Southern hospitality for you. He said, "Well, tell me their name." And they said, "Well, they were Hoopers." And the old man's eyes just grew big, and he said, "Hooper? Y'all are kin. Sit down. Y'all are kin." Love that. He is our next kinsman. And that sweet old timer, once he realized that they were kin, scrapped whatever he had on his to-do list that day and spent the rest of the day walking my wife and sister-in-law across farmers' fields left and right to show them where the family were buried. Y'all are kin. And Boaz was kin. In fact, the word for kin, especially near next kinsman, some translations actually call it a kinsman redeemer. Now, if we can't be any more obvious that Boaz is our type and shadow of Christ, here's our kinsman redeemer. What they mean by that is a near kinsman is someone who will avenge you if someone does something against you. That's the concern, for example, about needing cities of refuge. A kinsman redeemer is someone who would raise up seed for you. That's the case of the law of levirate marriage. Remember that? So important to have children that if a brother dies, then the next brother-in-law is supposed to marry the wife so that they can have a child that belongs to the husband that's already died. Remember this? That's Judah and Tamar for you. Well, this is going to be an interesting situation since Ruth Well, since Naomi has lost her husband and her sons, since Ruth has lost a husband, and who's the next kinsman who's going to redeem the family, who's going to redeem the family name, keep it perpetuating on behalf of the dead? Or if someone, for example, is in debtor's prison, who's going to redeem them by paying their debts? Well, their next of kin. If they've not only been sent off to debtor's prison, but if their land and property has been confiscated, then who can buy it back so that that inheritance can remain within the family? Well, someone within that family themselves, a kinsman, a redeemer. Okay, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Is that obvious enough for us? If not, it will be in a second. In verse 21, Ruth the Moabitess, again, reiterating her stranger status, said, "He said unto me also that thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field." Now that seems pretty innocuous, like, oh, so nice that you'll be with people that are kind and that who know you, and you go hang out with his maidens, and they'll meet you, and you don't have to meet anybody else. Well, again, there are better translations than that. It's not that just, oh, who are you going to meet out in the field? This is more of a scary, who will you chance upon in your unprotected state? I mean, if you're lowered to the level of gleaning, then you have no one to provide and probably no one to protect you. And so talk about being exposed to people who you would not want to meet in a dark alley at night, or in this case, an abandoned corner of a field somewhere. What Naomi is worried about, and this was her worry all along, what's this going to mean for you? I'm worried about you coming back to Israel with me and leaving a promising future in Moab. I'm worried about you gleaning in the fields because you could be accosted, you could be assaulted. So other translations make that a little bit more clear. It's not about they'll meet thee not in any other field. It's I don't want you to be harmed or harassed or abused or assaulted in any other field. So stay with Boaz. Sure enough, verse 23, she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz, to glean unto the end of barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. To me, there's a lesson we need to learn here from chapter 2 about where we are gleaning. In whose fields are we going to gather grain? All of us are choosing our mentors, choosing people that I want to learn from, for example. So often in college we think about, where do I want to go? And as students have asked me over the years, how do I decide on graduate school programs and where should I go for school? I often tell them it's less a matter of where and more a matter of who. Who do you want to learn from? Who are you choosing to be your mentors? I'm so grateful for the mentors that I was blessed with in college and in graduate school. I'm grateful for the mentors God has given me through life. And I am choosing, hopefully intentionally, hopefully wisely, that it's not just I happened to, but that's a field I want to glean in. I want to learn from so-and-so. I want to associate with these kinds of people. I am grateful to glean in the fields of prophets, seers, and revelators. I'm grateful to glean in the fields of prophets past as well as prophets present. I'm grateful for amazing minds out there that write and that speak and that teach and that I can learn from. One of my favorite sociologists of religion is a man named Peter Berger. He is not a Latter-day Saint. He's a stranger, but no stranger to truth and goodness. And one of my favorite quotes from him, he said that our realities hang by the thin thread of conversation. Love that. What's your reality? How do you view the world? It will most likely be influenced, in fact, largely constructed by your conversation partners. And that thin thread of conversation is what is holding up your worldview. So be careful about who it is on the other line, on the other side of the line. Are you having vertical conversations with God? That's a good conversation partner. Who are your horizontal conversation partners? because they will help determine how you view the world and yourself and God and everything else. So be careful in whose fields you glean. When I meet people that are struggling in their faith and they begin to raise their concerns, so often it's derivative. And I listen to them and I think, oh, I think I know who you've been listening to. I have a feeling you've probably read this and you watch this and you listen to this. And that's okay. I'm aware of those things because I've read it and I've listened and I've watched as well. But those aren't my conversation partners by choice. These are Scripture, prophets and apostles, wise men and women, historians and philosophers and thinkers that help me tie into a divine reality that has blessed my life for decades. And so just my caution, the tiny pieces of the grains that you gather will end up becoming your ideology, your worldview. And so often it's such a small grain, you don't think it's going to make a difference. But if that's what you're consuming bite by bite, then yes, that thin thread of conversation is dangling a reality before you that ends up becoming your own. My advice, my friends, based on Ruth chapter 2, is pray for good fields to glean in. If you are wise in that, the things you're picking up on social media, for example, oh, be careful. Because you're determining, you are what you eat. And so please glean in good fields with good grain. Chapter 3 of Ruth, then, the plot thickens and gets a lot more complicated. This is a weird chapter. So let's try to make sense of it as we go. In verse 1, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, my daughter, again, no need to mention in-law, I don't feel that way about you. You're a daughter in love, a daughter in life, not just a daughter-in-law. Shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? Now, rest was the word she used earlier. That's what I'm trying to give you. And this rest, I'm only thinking of you, as always. And so I want it to be well with you. In this case, it's going to be husband is what she's thinking. Okay? Again, don't tarry for me. I'm not going to have sons that you're going to have to wait for. But maybe you won't have to wait after all. Is there a way that we can work some things on? Can we be more proactive? Can we be intentional, shall we? Because I want things to be well with you. I want you to find rest. By the way, rest here can also be translated a resting place or a place of security, someone to provide for you, someone to extend their wings to keep you safe. By the way, it's also a play on the word for Noah, as in Noah and the ark. His ark was a place of rest and security. The ark rested upon the mountains. There are all kinds of great plays on words in Hebrew. So, Ruth, you need an ark. And I'm going to find you one. I need to find a good Noah out there that's going to let you in. In verse 2, this is her first idea and her best one. Now is not Boaz of our kindred? We're kin. With whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Now, threshing floor, remember, she's been working gleaning all through barley harvest, through wheat harvest. He told her, come every single day, okay? I'll provide for you. Well, harvest is coming to an end, and it's time to thresh the wheat. And so that's kind of an all day, all night kind of a thing. They make it into a huge kind of feast and festival. It's going to be festival of first fruits. And so what can we do? They're out there, they work all day, and they rejoice all night, and typically just spend the night in the field so they can keep working in the morning. And that's what's happening here. The fact it's at a threshing floor is beautifully symbolic, because remember, to thresh means you beat the wheat out, and so that the kernel of grain, what you want, separates out from the chaff, and then you winnow it, you throw it up in the air, and the weighty kernels fall back to the earth while the light chaff gets blown away by the wind. There's so many great symbols there, right? Anyway, that's where Boaz is going to be tonight. He's going to winnow on the threshing floor. Places where wheat and chaff are separated, places where you can judge between what to keep and what to leave behind. Threshing floors are great metaphors for places of choice, the valley of decision, places of judgment. We'll see shortly, a couple of weeks anyway, that a threshing floor becomes the site of the temple in Jerusalem. I can't think of a better place that separates wheat from chaff, a better place of judgment, a better place to really come to know what we are and who we are, and separate what we want to hold on to from what we want to leave behind. So great. And so this scene in chapter 3 unfolds at that kind of a place. So let's make good judgment here, okay? Verse 3, Naomi suggests to Ruth, "Wash thyself, therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor. But make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking." Now, washed, anointed, clothed. Sound familiar? Those are the words that were used for the priests and the Levites in the book of Exodus. In the book of Ezekiel, we'll actually see those same three elements, washed, anointed, and clothed, in the context of a marriage. What's on Naomi's mind? We got to get you ready for this. I mean, if Boaz only knows you as a gleaner, and you've been working from sun up to sundown and only taking occasional rest breaks under the shelter, you're a sweaty, dirty mess. No offense, Ruth. But if that's all he knows, why don't you clean yourself up a bit? Okay? So wash, anointed. Make yourself smell good. There's some good perfume. And put on your best attire. And then go. Verse 4, "It shall be when he lieth down that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie." So keep an eye on it when he lies down. Keep your eyes open when the sun's still up. See where he lays out his blanket and where he's going to make a bed for the night. And mark it in your mind so that you know where it is once the sun goes down. Then thou shalt go in and uncover his feet and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she said unto her, "All that thou sayest unto me, I will do." So Ruth fully trusts Naomi. This sounds kind of weird. Is this another one of those weird Israelite rituals that you do? Okay, I'm a stranger here. I don't know. I don't want to ask questions. But I also put total trust in Boaz. Whatever he says to me, I'm supposed to do it. Okay, I am worthy. I'm willing and submissive, and I will go. Now, this is where things get a little tricky. Okay, so bear with me, and let's make some good judgment on this threshing floor. Verse 6, she follows the plan. "She went down unto the floor, and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry," this feasting and festival over the harvest, right? "He went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn." And now time to go according to plan. "She, Ruth, came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down." Now here's where it gets tricky, and be careful here. There are those throughout history that have seen in this story some kind of illicit sexual advance or even sexual experience on the part of Ruth and Boaz here. They say that uncovering his feet is a mere euphemism for sexual intercourse. And they'll read things like, "Oh, well, he ate and drank and his heart was merry. So yeah, he's drunk and passed out." This is going to be one of those, she's a Moabitess. And so that's related to Lot and his daughters. Oh, okay. This is how Moabites do things. Oh, and now that it's some kind of sexual act has been consummated, then, it's supposed to be marriage and then consummation, but I guess we'll have to reverse and pull a shotgun wedding. And so Ruth is forcing Boaz's hand. Be a little more careful on this threshing floor. Okay? Judge righteous judgment. Now, are there things that could be interpreted that way? Sure. And some scholars have gone down that path and said all the evidence lines up and suggests that. Here's the point I want to make, though, cautiously. Whereas many of the words and phrases in chapter 3 would allow for that interpretation, none of them require that interpretation. And there's a huge difference there. Is it possible that that kind of thing could be happening? I suppose. Then again, this could simply be not metaphorical, some kind of uncovering his feet, quote unquote. Maybe she really was just uncovering his feet and removed the blanket. Often servants in the ancient Near East would even lie down at the feet of their master to keep their master's feet warm. Or just to show, it's kind of like nailing the ear to the doorpost that I am attaching myself to your household. In this case, I am at your feet. I am at your service. You can do anything you want to me. Isn't that what Naomi had said? Whatever he says, do. Prostrate yourself at his feet. Bow before him, so to speak. And whatever he says, be willing to accept. This idea of, well, let's connect it back to Matthew chapter 1 again. In Matthew chapter 1, the genealogy of Jesus and all these 4 women leading up to the 5th, who is Mary, I already said that Ruth is a great example of Jesus choosing the hungry and the thirsty and the stranger and the poor. But as we saw with Tamar, as we saw with Rahab, as we'll see later with Bathsheba, there also seem to be some kind of sexuality hinted at in these 4 other women. But what's Matthew trying to do? Back up Mary to say nothing untoward was done. This looks bad. She's pregnant out of wedlock, but nothing wrong has happened. With that in mind, again, I want to give Ruth chapter 3 the benefit of any of those doubts. And though this looks a little odd, what's she doing kind of snuggling up next to Boaz in the sleeping bag, so to speak? What's she doing uncovering his feet there on the threshing floor and lying down next to him? Well, borrowing from Tamar and Rahab, borrowing from Mary, I would make no false accusations or untoward insinuations towards Ruth here. Let's be careful on this threshing floor. Notice what happens next. Verse 8 and 9. It came to pass at midnight that the man, Boaz, was afraid and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, Who art thou? And she answered, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Same servant I've always been. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. Now, the fear in Boaz's face, this is a mighty man of wealth, but also a mighty man of virtue. And to see a woman unexpectedly as he wakes up in the middle of the night and someone's there and he's like, what just happened? What has anything happened? What are you doing? And he's scared for his reputation. We'll see more of that in a moment. He's scared for his own virtue. What's happening? And she reassures him, I'm just Ruth, I'm just your servant. And then this all-important phrase, spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. Now, our eyes should light up with recognition based on what we've learned already about the play on words in some of the Hebrew we've studied today. Spread thy skirt, the extreme edge of your garment, the hem of your robe, your wing. You're a near kinsman, a kinsman redeemer. Remember back in chapter 2, verse 12? The key verse we're supposed to remember. This is Ruth choosing the God of Israel, under whose wing thou art come to trust. It's amazing how all of this comes together. Ruth, you trust the wing of your Redeemer. So here's Ruth saying to Boaz, you are my Redeemer. Put me under the shelter of your wing. You are my kinsman. Spread your skirt over me. Powerful, powerful imagery here. In verse 10, Boaz says, "Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter." There is a relationship here already through Elimelech to Naomi, down to their son, on to Ruth. I recognize this. Y'all are kin. Sit down. "For thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich." Oh, Ruth wasn't trying to seduce anyone for self-protection or self-aggrandizement. She wasn't going after young men just so that she could have someone to provide for her, whether poor or rich. So there were rich younger people. It's not like I'm just trying to seduce Boaz so I can get some money from him. He is a wealthy man after all. No, they were young wealthy men that would have been more closer to me in age, someone I was physically attracted to perhaps, and then can provide. I'm good. Well, yeah, I'm good, but where does that leave Naomi? Without anyone. And that's not what I'm trying to do. In fact, here it seems that Boaz is recognizing in Ruth's conversation an attempt to live the law of levirate marriage, just like Tamar had done. And that way Naomi has posterity. Wait a minute. That's amazing. See, my husband died with no children. His brother died also with no children. So there's no levirate marriage there. And so what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to marry my father-in-law and raise up seed for my husband. And that way that line of the house of Israel continues. But my father-in-law is gone also. We're all widows here. Well, then who's next? And in the law of levirate marriage, you just keep going until you find a redeemer among your kinsmen. And that would be Boaz. And so what is Ruth doing here? Again, it's selflessness. It's not about me. I'll have a husband. I'll be provided for. Yeah, that'll come, but that's an afterthought. Naomi will have posterity in Israel. Whoa. My husband who died will have a son to call his own, and that family line will go on. Indeed, it will go on till Jesus. Matthew chapter 1. You see what's happening here? And Boaz gets it all. Boaz, no wonder he calls her my daughter. No wonder you've shown more kindness now than in the beginning. It's amazing what you're willing to do. Not just to provide food for Naomi, but to provide posterity as well. Man, you're good. You understand Israelite culture and law better than I assumed. You better believe she did. Verse 11, "Now my daughter," there that title is again, "fear not." I was afraid that I now know I have no reason to fear, neither do you. "I will do to thee all that thou requires." I will perform my duty in the law of levirate marriage, just like you have offered to do your duty in the law of levirate marriage. And then this great statement, "For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman." Again, you see why I want to cut this story some slack and avoid a possible interpretation that I would consider a misinterpretation. She's a virtuous woman, and everyone knows it. Yeah. In the woman with the issue of blood, she felt virtue go out of Christ through the furthest feather, through the hem of his garment. Boaz didn't need to feel any virtue go out of him as he covered her with the skirt. No, he knew her virtue already. And some of her virtue was flowing into him in beautiful ways. These are both above board. These are virtuous, good, chaste people. Even when King Solomon builds the temple and has two massive pillars to hold it up, he gives them names. And one of them he names Boaz. There's a pillar of strength. There's something to hold up the temple of God. And the house of God will be supported by him in more ways than one. Here, It's going to lead to a birth in Bethlehem, the house of bread, through his own posterity. Verse 12. Now it is true that I am thy near kinsman. Here's levirate marriage kicking in. Howbeit, so here's the catch, here's the problem. There is a kinsman nearer than I. So we got to figure this thing out. Yes, I want to play my part. You're playing yours, but there's somebody closer. I'm not next of kin. I'm next of kin. So here's the plan. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning that if he, the closest kinsman, if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman's part. You'll be provided for at least. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then will I do the part of a kinsman to thee. As the Lord liveth, lie down until the morning. So again, Boaz is going by the book. Here's someone who is just and righteous and obedient, even to the point of, no, I'm not going to go out of bounds, even to do a right thing, let alone a wrong thing. So we've got to go by the book, and I've got to ask this other one if he's willing to do it. If he doesn't, and I'm your guy, as the Lord liveth, I swear on the existence of my God that I will provide for you. Verse 14, she lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before one could know another. So before the light of day, before anyone could see what had happened. We're trying to protect reputation here. No people thinking things they shouldn't be thinking. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came into the floor. Again, I don't want false rumors to fly. Also, he said, bring the veil that thou hast upon thee, and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 measures of barley, and laid it on her, and she went into the city. I love that the symbol of her modesty, the veil, now becomes a means whereby she gains great blessings. I mean, it's happening literally, right? You got anything to hold? Oh, just hold out your veil, okay? It's dark. Nobody's going to see you anyway, so it's fine. You don't have to cover yourself. Hold it out, and let me just dump as much barley as you can hold, and come back home. Go back to Naomi. So again, providing, protecting. He's doing all of these things. But I do love the symbolism there. Your symbol of modesty is also a source of great reward. Verse 16 then. When she came to her mother-in-law, again she said, who art thou, my daughter? And now a better way to say it, whose art thou? Are you Boaz's? How did he react? Did this work? Have you found rest? Is it well with thee? Who art thou, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, these 6 measures of barley gave he me, for he said to me, go not empty unto thy mother-in-law. So here's evidence of his intentions to provide not just for me, but to provide for you as well. This kinsman redeemer will live the law of levirate marriage, and you will have, you said you didn't have hope for a future in terms of a husband. You can have hope for a future in terms of a child. A son, grandson, grandchild. Just, your future is bright, Mom. God is providing. In verse 18 then, the chapter ends. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall. For the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day. There's a pretty close equivalent to stand still and see the salvation of God. We have done everything within our power. This is a great contrary to prove as well. To be proactive, but also to be submissive. To act like it all depends on you, but then to be patient and pray like it all depends on God. And that's exactly what Naomi is doing. At the beginning of the chapter, we got to take matters into our own hands. Go down to the threshing floor. Okay, let's start the process. Initiate at least a conversation. Look like a wife. Smell like a wife. And maybe he'll see you in more wifely terms. Okay? But then the flip side, she starts the chapter with proactivity, ends the chapter with total submission. Works at the beginning, faith at the end, and neither one is dead because they both have the other. Chapter 4 then, you see how the story comes to its end, and it's a glorious one. Verse 1, then went Boaz up to the gate. There's the place of judgment, okay, the palm of Deborah, in this case the gate of the city, and sat him down there, And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by. Oh, just so happened. Another coincidence. No, I don't think so. Unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, like just the guy I was looking for. Turn aside, sit down here. And he did. He turned aside and sat down. Verse 2, Then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city. I need a jury here. I need judges. And said, Sit ye down here. And they sat down. Gathers his witnesses. He's calling court into session. Verse 3, he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. I mean, you're first in line. So if you want this land, it's yours. It's yours for the purchase. It's yours for the redemption. Redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, since I'm next in line, that I may know. For there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I'm after thee. So you got dibs. I'm second in line. So if you want it, take it. If not, let me know, and I'll do it. Well, verse 4, the man says, sounds great. Land? I'm always for more land. So yes, I will redeem it. Now, this is looking really bad for Naomi and Ruth. Well, maybe not. They'll have somebody. But what kind of a person? Watch what happens next. Then said Boaz, oh, yeah, I forgot. Okay, sorry, I'm here to advertise this land, but there are a few strings attached. Okay, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead. And why do you have to do that? To raise up the name of the dead unto his inheritance. So there's the very clear reference to the law of levirate marriage. You have a duty here. If you thought land was reward, well, there is also responsibility that goes along with reward. Now, if that doesn't describe family life, I don't know what does. And if that doesn't describe what sexuality should be seen as, then we're missing something there too. I think too often when we think of, oh, reward, I'm in it. Oh, responsibility, no thanks. And often when we think of relationships and sexuality as something I can gain without anything I have to give back in terms of raising children that come as a result. No, we have to be better than that. And so here's this, do you understand both halves of this, my near kinsman? You'll have to marry Ruth as well. Verse 6, all of a sudden, things have completely changed for this near kinsman. Whoa, the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Catch it? He backs out as soon as he sees the responsibility side. And yet he seems to suggest it's just about the land. I thought it would work, but it's there, that part of the field? Sorry, it wouldn't fit really well with my property over here. So as much as I would love to help, I just can't do it, sorry. But if you're next in line, I mean, have at it, brother. And Boaz does. You see the selfishness? Finally, we have somebody that enters in the story from start to finish. The book of Ruth is a story of selflessness. And when selfishness raises its ugly head, this guy fits really well in the book of Judges, where everybody does what's right in his own eyes. All of a sudden, it's no longer right in my eyes because I stand to lose something. So no thanks. Go right ahead. And Boaz does. In verse 7 through 10, they perform this version of the shoe ritual we learned back in Deuteronomy chapter 25. It's a weird one. Remember in that one, if you're the woman, the widow, and your near kinsman won't perform the law of levirate marriage, then what do you get to do? You take his shoe off, you spit in his face. You're basically saying, well, you're going to see what it feels like to have the shoe on the other foot. You go barefoot for a while. You go unprotected and unprovided for. And yeah, spit in the face, and for the rest of time, that person is going to be called the person whose shoe was loosed. You wouldn't even do your duty to your own family. Well, this isn't Ruth performing that ritual. There was a softer way of doing it, and that was, I'm going to take my own shoe off and give it to someone else so they can walk a mile in my shoe. No spitting in the face necessary this way. And that's exactly what happens in these next few verses. The man takes his shoe off, gives it to Boaz. Here's the sign. Boaz is actually going to do. He's going to go. He's going to walk in the path I should have walked in. He's going to walk in my shoes. In verse 11, all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. Okay, this is all done above board according to the law. Everything's fine. Boaz is not trying to usurp some kind of prerogative that isn't his. He's taking it legally. They say, the Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Phares, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. Now that is an awesome verdict on the part of this jury, this group of 10 judges. These witnesses, okay, it's all above board, we're good to go. And innocent, we're going to dot the I's and cross the T's, and Ruth is now a wife of Boaz. And then who do they connect her to? Remember she said it, don't make me leave, let me be one of you. Thy people shall be my people, thy God my God. Well, how's this for being adopted into the house of Israel? Ruth, we want you to be just like Leah and Rachel, matriarchs. We want you to be just like, when that mentions Phares and Tamar and Judah, well, there's our most famous example of the law of levirate marriage. And this is all correct and right. This is happening according to plan. They are drawing Ruth into lofty Israelite company. You're one of us. So, verse 13, Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. Oh, the ultimate blessing for this union. God honored this marriage by allowing it to be fruitful in literal ways. And that's actually interesting because we saw before, after 10 years of marriage in Moab, Ruth still had no children. Was she considered barren? Perhaps her husband was the weak link in the chain, but not to have any children. And now, all of a sudden, she has a child. What a blessing. Verse 14, the women said unto Naomi, notice they're speaking to her, not to Ruth. That's part of what levirate marriage is all about. They say, blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman. In other words, without a redeemer, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. This isn't just Boaz. This is her grandson. This is the son of Ruth. He's going to restore your life. He's going to nourish you in your old age. And isn't that what grandchildren do? They make us young again. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. Oh, this is, again, not just a daughter-in-law. This is a daughter in love, in life, in very deed. And the son she gives you is your posterity. Every bit as much yours as it is Ruth's, which means he's Israel. This is the line that will come to Jesus. She loves you. She's better than 7 sons. We'll see a play on that in 1 Samuel in just a second. But all is well for Naomi. This woman who had been so selfless from the very beginning, all of the blessings are coming back to her. That's how selflessness works. Verse 16 then, Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom, became nurse unto it. And the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So speaking of grandchildren, Obed is Naomi's grandson. David, King David, is Obed's grandson. We're getting close to some famous stories, okay? And then the chapter ends with some more genealogy that goes, again, culminates in David, but goes back to Phares, the son of Tamar, this ultimate example of levirate marriage. It's all happening according to plan. By the way, the name Obed comes from the verb meaning to work or to serve, which is exactly what Naomi always did for the people around her, and exactly what Ruth always did in reverse. This is the perfect fruit of that kind of fruitful friendship and fruitful relationship. And all of this during the days when the judges ruled. It's amazing to me. I love the book of Ruth. And when I get to teach women in the scriptures classes, this is one of my favorite books to focus on. Because what lessons we can learn, not just about womanhood or motherhood, but about friendship and about discipleship, about goodness, about God. I love this book. And while we're on the subject of righteous women, turn the page and you will see the next incredible mother in Israel, who is Hannah, in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Great segue from one story to the next.